The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, or Breath of the Wild sequel if you prefer, in 2021, or maybe being pushed to 2022. It much depends on our previous video, which we did about the Switch Pro in 2021, and whether Breath of the Wild 2 will be tied to the launch of that one or not, because if it's not tied to that one, the game could easily slip if it needs more time to early 2022, much like what was the case when it slipped from 2016 to early 2017 with Breath of the Wild.
I do think that it's still a possibility. Of course, predictions as of right now are hard because it all depends on what we will see in that first, new trailer that we will eventually get. If we barely get to see any gameplay in the next trailer, then we know they're probably not far enough yet. Let's call it repeat their mistake of Breath of the Wild, where they just kept coming up with new ideas and the game kept shifting more and more backwards, and it ended up having a delay of close to 2 years, I guess. I don't think that they will repeat that same mistake with Breath of the Wild 2. I do think they will show us something when they have something relevant to show, and based on that, we can probably get a very good estimation if 2021 is realistic, but if it's also in their plans in general.
They wrapped up the DLC by the end of 2017. The main Zelda team was likely moving on by that point onward. So would be in 2021, it would be roughly 3 years since we've seen anything of major relevancy or major push out of the Zelda franchise when it comes to a mainline game. I think 3 years building on the game that you already built is technically totally possible. We don't know how much delay they had because of COVID and how much that impacted the overall transition from development to completion, but I do technically think it's a possibility to see that game next year.
Just feel really strongly it's the holiday 2021 game. And the reason I think it's coming next year, regardless, is because of the Zelda anniversary. And I know they'll probably have other things. We'll probably get like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess on Switch or something. But to me, seeing how they pushed Mario this year and, knowing what a big deal Zelda is to so many people, I just kind of feel like the time is right to have it as their big holiday game. And again, I totally agree with everything you guys are saying. They could push it to early next year if they need more development time, but it lines up so nicely with everything that we're thinking about when it comes to 2021 with Switch Pro and with the Zelda anniversary and needing a big game and having a big holiday game. The Age of Calamity release this year, getting people reinvested in that world. It just makes sense.
I also think that 2021 is the ultimate year to launch Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. It's pretty much the midpoint of the Nintendo Switch, maybe a little bit beyond the midpoint, but it's at least comfortable. It's not as far as, say, Skyward Sword was, which was the year before we got Wii U, and where you also require different peripherals to even play it. In that case, it was the Wii Motion Plus. And I don't think they're going to do with any of those kind of limitations. They just want to deliver a sequel that was better than the original, with a better narrative experience, with a better gameplay experience, and of course upgraded dungeon and also character-based experience with even more voice acting, which we got a big taste of in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. But the thing is, I think that it all depends on the ambition and the will of the Zelda team to deliver a game that is pretty much flawless and addresses most of all shortcomings of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's definitely coming out either with the Switch Pro, but it's definitely coming after the Switch Pro. It might be confusing what I mean by that.
Right, you mean that it's either a launch game for Switch Pro or after. Right, we're not getting it before Switch Pro, for sure.
So you're going to be playing the experience, the top level experience that we want, with the right color saturations, the right resolution, the right frame rate. Literally the Age of Calamity experience, but with more stable frame rate, and obviously the same resolution or maybe even higher on the Nintendo Switch Pro, or the dock that also was suggested by Don in the previous video. But it all comes down to how ambitious this game is, because we remember with Breath of the Wild, it went from one thing and then it just continued to grow and grow and grow. And this game also started as DLC pack 3 for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Then it was turned into a sequel. We're going to reuse the world and map of Hyrule, but the question is, maybe they have gotten even bigger ambitions, and that's why we haven't seen the game for 1.5 years since it was revealed at E3 2019.
I do have to say that we have seen a trend lately where more and more we have games being announced and released pretty closely together. We had that with Age of Calamity, to only 2 months from showing to like the announcement trailer to release. I do think that, again, they're not going to repeat it like they did with Breath of the Wild, where they show a trailer in 2016 and it's not going to release until much later. I do think that once we get to see something Breath of the Wild 2, it's going to be probably, if I had to guess, maybe half a year away from that moment. In terms of what you said about their ambition, I think Numa's words kind of speak for themselves. Before they announced Age of Calamity, he literally said, like, regarding the sequel, in order to make the vast world you enjoyed exploring in the original game even more impressive, we are working extremely hard on its development. So there is definitely that ambition to make it much bigger, more special, and it's not going to just feel like glorified DLC with the same world, but like a few new quests and a new story.
But series producer AJ Numa mentioned during the reveal that we have to wait a little bit longer before we're ready to show Breath of the Wild 2. So that could be hinting that it might not be that long until we see it in 2021. Is it too optimistic to hope for it during the Zelda's 35th anniversary in February?
Well, like I said, February or whenever that Switch Pro presentation happens, I think that's when we're going to finally see more of Breath of the Wild 2.
Here's the thing with Breath of the Wild 2, obviously we only see the trailer from 2019 and it's been a while since we've seen it, but they likely kept it hidden for a reason and because we're still actively working on it. I feel that once 2021 comes around, it's a make it or break it deal. If we don't see it like early enough, there's a good chance we might not see it released next year because they still have plenty of stuff to talk about, plenty of stuff to basically reveal because we've only seen that minute and a half trailer.
I completely agree, and I think that they need to bring up gameplay pretty much with the Switch Pro presentation. If there is one, obviously, if they just throw it out on YouTube one day, but I don't think that's going to be the case. We already talked about that in the Switch Pro video. It's likely that with hardware that requires explanation and demonstration, I think it's crucial for them to do a proper presentation and also a showcase of why you should buy this system when you already have the option of playing docked and undocked, and especially if it's going to cost more as well. So I think that the next thing we're going to see from Breath of the Wild 2 is probably going to be gameplay, because the entire reveal trailer was all about story, lore, and teases of things to come. The thread of Ganondorf's resurrection, possible tease of Zelda being playable because of the shorter hair. That could also obviously be a lot to do with the fact that they wanted to make sure that this is a sequel, because we know that Zelda had long hair in both Breath of the Wild and Age of Calamity, so it makes sense that, okay, we know that Breath of the Wild 2 is a sequel because of Zelda's hair. And then, of course, with all the new elements that they're going to introduce, because it's obvious, this game is gonna likely play differently than The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, at least to some extent. That is the part that could delay the game. Not the story, not the voice acting, it's the gameplay.
Most of the development time, granted, if they indeed reuse the overworld, which they said they will, so that means they're gonna have to change so much in terms of gameplay. The whole Sheikah Slate aesthetics and physics, it was fun, like a lot of fun. But I think it's gonna overstay its welcome if we get another game with the exact same stuff. So they're gonna have to find a replacement for it. Of course, they still want to keep that same appeal, I guess you could say, because the Sheikah Slate really made Breath of the Wild complete, in my opinion. So if they're going to take it away, it's going to have to be replaced with something equally as good.
And if they are working with a new kind of mechanical thing which needs tweaking and adjusting, that is the one thing I think could delay Breath of the Wild 2 into 2022.
But if physics are going to be involved again, at least they have a basis now. They can expand it much further. Like I think it's a bit similar to Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. With the first one, when they were making that one, obviously they had a lot of stuff to work on. How is gravity going to work? How is it going to affect the player? How are you going to build a level around this system of gravity and stuff like that? With Galaxy, that foundation was already there, and they could expand it and take it even further, go more crazy with it. So if anything, I think Breath of the Wild 2 will probably use the same foundation, but there's going to be stuff there that's going to be so radically different that it's still like not a game you could develop in like 2 years.
When you reuse assets, the expectations of getting a game out in, say, 4 and something years is also there. Because if you're going to take 5 years while reusing the engine, reusing the characters, even reusing the world, then people are going to start thinking, is it worth the wait? Because with everyone remembers Majora's Mask coming out 2 years after, even less than 2 years after Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. If there's one thing this game is going to have to battle immediately, is the comparison to just being, oh, this is just an expansion to Breath of the Wild. They need to make it as unique and standalone as they can, because we know we're not getting a new Zelda experience of the same scale and ambition until Nintendo Switch has been succeeded sometime in 2024, 5, maybe even 6.
The interesting thing to think about, though, is like you think back to Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, like there was a story reason for characters looking like other characters. Like they reused all those character models for the Postman and Malon, and like there's all this stuff that's reused in a different way in Majora's Mask, and I don't think they're really going to do that with Breath of the Wild 2. I think because it's a direct continuation, I think a lot of the character models will just be the same characters. This is clearly the same Hyrule. The question is how much new content is going to be there and how much of the original Hyrule that we explored in Breath of the Wild is going to be present here. We also don't even really know like how Zelda's going to play or like what the new gameplay mechanics are going to be with Link. Like I'm assuming Link is going to have something to do with that new arm thing that we see in the trailer, and you guys would certainly know more than me, Monster Maze and Commonwealth, because you guys are like hardcore Zelda people. But I also think like with Zelda cutting off her hair, that could potentially lead to Zelda maybe being playable, and like if there's new mechanics with that. So yeah, I think a lot of it is how much of Hyrule as we know it is going to be reused and how much is going to be new. And I'm presuming the majority of development time on this one is not on physics engines and things like that, because as you had already mentioned, they've already put that in place. It's probably on dungeons. It's probably on like these massive puzzle-filled dungeons that people were asking for in Breath of the Wild that we didn't really get. That, and then of course like story stuff, cutscenes and voiceovers and things like that. So my presumption is actually most of Hyrule is pretty much good to go already. I don't think that's really where they're having trouble with the game. I feel like it's on track still to be 2021. I mean, it initially got announced at E3 back in 2019. It's had 2 full years to gestate, but we all know that it's been in development since, the DLC of Breath of the Wild was in development. So realistically, I don't see any problems.
If we just summarize this a little bit up, I think that it will be an extremely big disappointment for the Zelda team if they don't make it by the end of the 35th anniversary of The Legend of Zelda. Age of Calamity came out before the anniversary, and yes, even if you have a compilation of previous Zelda games, even if they are the launch title for the Switch Pro, I think the Zelda team really wants to bring out this game at a time slot that is not too close to the end of the Switch generation, but also where they can make a big impact during an anniversary, because it's obvious that this is the first confrontation against Ganondorf in 15 years.
The other thing to point out is you mentioned the anniversary connection, right? And, obviously this year was huge for Mario. We had the huge Mario 35th anniversary, but that ultimately culminates and ends in March of next year. So realistically, even if they do need to push it to 2022, they could just say, all right, you know what? Let's hit another anniversary. Not only is this the big Zelda 35th thing, but this is also going to launch exactly 5 years after the original Breath of the Wild, March 3rd, 2022, right? They could do that. If they do want to push it, they realistically are like, we're not going to make the holiday. They need extra time. I could also see them doing that and then them just extending the Zelda 35th stuff into 2022 a little bit. But I really feel like at the absolute latest, Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be March 2022, and the absolute earliest is going to be like October of this year, of next year.
Yeah, like most likely this is going to be a November launch, much like we saw with Age of Calamity this year, like November 20th-ish, the area, or if they're not making that date, it's gonna be March 2022. And those are the 2 possibilities I see. I don't see any other dates for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel.
Sprinkles here and there of trailers, and then another big blowout sometime in the summer, and one final blowout in a maybe Zelda Direct in the fall that outlines all of their plans for the holiday and for the Zelda anniversary, like a special Switch Pro that's black and gold with the Triforce on it, or a Switch Lite, or like a Triforce collection, or whatever they're gonna do.
I think that we have laid this out very well. Arguments both in favor of 2021 and against. Mostly against this if they don't make it, because it's too ambitious and they have problems that they need to adjust for those extra months that pushes the game out from an October-November slot to a, say, March 2022 slot. And I think that is the perfect way of concluding. We don't have much more to say, and we're gonna get a better Zelda experience, at least from a technical perspective, and hopefully also from a gameplay experience at the end of 2021 or in early 2022. And that is a very positive message to end this video with. I want to thank so much Rogersbase, Nintendaan, and Monster Maze for joining me for this video, but also all the 3 previous videos where we detailed Nintendo Switch in 2021 2021, and a little bit also in 2022, depending on how things evolve with the world situations and so on. But by the end of next year, we'll definitely know far more about The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, and hopefully, if things go well, we might be playing it by the end of Zelda's 35th anniversary. Anyway, be sure to press that like button, subscribe to all of our 4 channels, and of course press that notification bell, and again for all notifications, because there will be plenty more Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 videos, especially after we get the title drop and the true gameplay of the game and the build up all the way to its launch in 2021, or if it has to be delayed, in 2022.